Well, thank you guys so much for joining me again tonight. I'm Stephanie from Spellbound Stitchery, and I'm going to talk to you about spiritual stitching, which is incorporating needlepoint into your spiritual or religious practice. Now, I think and I know that there's more than one religion out there, and there's more than one spiritual path out there. And I want this to be open to everybody. So I'm not going to be sharing about my personal spirituality. I don't think that that really plays a role here, except, if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer those questions. I'm not here to push an agenda of any kind. I'm just here to give some examples of how needlepoint has been incorporated into some religious practices, um, in hopes that it gives you some inspiration for how you can incorporate it into your individual practice or your religious practice. Um, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really fun. I think it's compelling. And I also don't think that this only applies to needlepoint specifically. I think it applies to any fiber art. But since we have found one another through needlepoint, I'm gonna be focusing on needlepoint, but you can just replace needlepoint with quilting or embroidery or knitting or whatever else you want to replace that with in your mind when you're thinking about these things, because I think any kind of fiber art can apply to these settings. They can also apply to like your creative practice or your mental health practice. It's just that I have a needlepoint business. This is what I do for a living, so this is my area of focus. I hope that makes sense. All right. So, um, yes, I am gonna explain a little bit, just as a recap of the introduction. I'm gonna go over of how fiber arts have been used in different religious contexts, multiple religious contexts, and then I'm gonna explain how you can incorporate your needlework into your religious practice or into your spiritual practice with a few ideas and different techniques, for how you can do that. So I'm using two different words here, right? I'm using the words religion and I'm using the word spirituality. Some people may think that those two things are one and the same, and some people may find that those two things have a very distinct flavor. To me, and also like according to my research, religion is much more structured and organized. There's a certain set of like rules. It's beliefs and practices that are all held by a community. So it's a very formalized set of practices that can help people, achieve maybe their spiritual goals or maybe their relational goals. And then spirituality is more of the individual's practice. So we've got like the organized, like almost corporate structure, the group, the organization, the very structured approach. And then there's more a free-flowing approach to how does the individual connect with the divine. So spirituality, it can involve like healing the ego and developing self-esteem, your belief in your self-worth and your capacity for love, generosity, all sorts of good attributes. And it's about finding your meaning and purpose in life beyond your everyday concerns. Um, and I think personally, like a religious person can be super spiritual or a spiritual person can be super religious, but that doesn't always have to be the case. So, like a religious person may be super, super religious, goes to church every Sunday or goes to the place of worship every week very regularly, very religiously. But they may not have a private, personal connection outside of the organized structure. Alternatively, someone who is very, very spiritual may feel that connection to divinity and to the universe or to like their fellow man, and I feel that practice very deeply and never go to church. And I think that's fine. And I think that's actually good. Like, as one of my friends at App State said, there's more than one way up the mountain. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So let's talk about how fiber arts are used in spiritual settings. A lot of my photograph examples are photos that I've taken at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. So I'll be showing a bunch of those, and I have TikToks about my visit to the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Um, I have such a love for this cathedral. I have such a love for the needlepoint inside of it. I could probably talk this entire time just about what's in the cathedral, but I'm gonna try not to. So within this setting, as an example, you see needlepoint and fiber arts in the church kneelers, in the altar cloths, and you may see it on like the vestments that the clergy wear. And specifically within the National Cathedral, um, there was a there was a like formed committee that formed alongside like the architect that developed this cathedral. So these projects were running in parallel. The construction of the cathedral itself and the needlepoint to go inside of it. The needlepoint, the art, the architecture within this place are very intentional. They're very spiritual. They all have so much meaning. And so all of these pieces within the church, every single one of the kneelers, every single one of the benches, every single piece of tapestry or fiber art that you see within this cathedral is needle pointed by hand by artisans, specifically with the intention to add it to the worship and add it to the sacred space. There is a prayer actually that I want to read to you guys that is from the National Cathedral, and I put it somewhere and now I'm gonna have to find it again. So give me like 2 seconds while I dig it up. Here it is. Okay, that didn't take too long. So this is the prayer that is included in the book all about the needlepoint within the National Cathedral. Um, they have tours of the needlepoint and all kinds of other stuff, but this prayer I find so sweet and touching, and I think it helps to like explain and contextualize how the people who were stitching these pieces felt about their work and their efforts, stitching these thousands and thousands of cushions and kneelers and everything else in this church. O eternal God, who through the ages has been graciously pleased to receive the gifts of those who willingly dedicate their time, their patient skill, and their substance, we are bold to offer this needlepoint, the labor of many faithful hands. May this work, being separated from all unhallowed, ordinary, and common purposes, be consecrated to the glory and blessing of thy church. I think the language that they use in there is so interesting. It's like completely separated from any secular purpose. The needlepoint, the working of it was done intentionally for this church. And it blows me away every time. There was, oh, let me see, where did I put it? Okay, I'm going back a little bit just so that I can show you. Do you see this rug behind me that's leading up to the altar? This huge rug? That is all needle pointed by hand. Yeah, I see Lauren's face. Her face looks like this. And it is incredible. I got like special permission to go up and actually look at it because my tour guide when I toured the cathedral knew that I needle pointed, and so he wanted me to like see it and appreciate it. But I think like 20 women participated in the stitching of just this rug to the altar. I just I just can't, like, it blows my mind.
How
Does
old
anyone
is how old is that rug?
so I think they finished all of the needlepoint for this church, like, in the 80s or 90s, and they did it all with 100% wool. They did it all in basket weave. Well, mostly in basket weave. There's one cushion that's done in decorative stitches. And they did it like with the explicit purpose of and with the knowledge that they wanted it to last 200 years. Like they're they were like, yeah, this is gonna last. So it's fascinating. It's incredible. I just can't. Um, yeah. If you ever have the chance to visit the National Cathedral, do it just for the needlepoint. Just for the needlepoint. It's worth it. Just go to DC sometime just to see the needlepoint in here. Okay. So, I got ahead of myself a little bit. So, needlepoint for the church is like needlepoint for the community, for the spiritual community. I think of it as like a person's tithe or offering, except it's not financial gifts that they're giving to their community of spiritual believers, their church. It's like a different type of gift, probably more valuable than a monetary gift. If I'm being honest, I think that like you guys know what it takes to stitch something of this size and the scale. Um, so this is like a different type of gift to give the church other than a financial gift. Some other interesting things that I've seen done for churches include things like usher name tags that are needle pointed. I think that's really cool, just like a little name tag that says usher. But there's all kinds of applications for church needlepoint. I will say the Episcopals have kind of cornered the market on this in terms of the Christian denominations. I mean, the National Cathedral is like part of the Episcopal denomination, but many Episcopal churches have needlepoint programs. I'm not saying that it's only for Episcopals, but they have really like they've said we're going to do this, and a lot of them have like needlepoint committees and stuff, and I think that's incredible. Okay, so that is an example of how you can incorporate needlepoint into like your religious, your church, all of that, like the more the structure, the organization, like yeah, the church itself. So let's bring it home. So I think this is really, really cool. I'm a little bit envious of the Judaica, if I'm being honest, because there's so many practical applications where people have found ways to incorporate their spiritual practice, their religion, and how they actually practice their religion, and they've done it with needlepoint. So first up is the challah cover by Rachel Berry Designs over there on the far left. So during the weekly Shabbat, which is done on Friday nights, there is a ritual that the family does together. And during that ritual, the challah, the bread, is covered because the wine needs to get blessed first, and the bread will get blessed separately. So before the wine gets blessed, the bread has to kind of hide, and and then the bread is blessed, and then the cover is removed. And so there's all kinds of different ways to do that. You do not need to needlepoint your challah cover. It can be done with a different cloth, but it's a special cloth that's set aside, that is used only for this purpose, and it's, very, very spiritually significant. And I think it's amazing that there's needle pointed options. Now, additionally, the yarmulke, which is in the center, that is what is worn on the man's head during religious ceremonies or during special holidays. Someone may have to remind me exactly what it means, because of course Judaism is not my practice, but that is acknowledging that God is holy, and we must kind of like cover ourselves in his holiness. And then the mezuzah, which is here, I always forget which way I'm pointing. The mezuzah there on the left-hand side by Allison Ivy Designs, that is a prayer that is like rolled up into a teeny tiny little scroll and then covered, and then like placed inside a door frame, so that when you enter and leave your home, you touch the prayer or say the prayer. And so the prayer is like physically written out and curled up and then placed in the door. Now, you do not have to have it needle pointed. It doesn't need to be made by your hands, but making these spiritually significant items with your own hands I think that has to make them more spiritually potent and more spiritually significant, because while you're stitching them, you are thinking about those things, you are practicing those things, you are actively like putting your intention and your care and your love into these objects. And I think it's incredible. And okay, so it shows, someone just sent me a direct message. It shows that the man is under the covenant with the Lord. That's why the men will wear the yarmulkes. Thank you so much. Okay, so now for Christianity, we see a lot of these examples around Christmas time and around the holidays, I think. Mary Catherine did her Advent Candle series, which is gorgeous. The stitch guides are by Stephanie Chase. And so, you would like the Advent calendar, and then you would also put out your needlepoint. And I love the way that Mary Catherine has incorporated the imagery for each candle's meaning onto the design of the needlepoint candle. Additionally, Patricia Sohn has nativities, but nativities are everywhere. I think, Ellen, how many nativities do you have in your home during the holidays? It's a lot, isn't it?
That I've stitched or that I have?
Well, that you've stitched.
I've stitched maybe 4 or 5, but
Yeah,
probably over 40 that I have around my house.
incredible. So it's a beautiful piece of holiday decor, but in addition to that, it reminds us of like what is the meaning of Christmas and the Christ and the story of the birth of Christ. So stitching those things, as you stitch them, you're thinking about the story and you're stitching your own self into that story. And I think it's a really great way, a compelling way to like really internalize, your spiritual practice in that way. And then for Easter, I think that there's a lot of these really beautiful, vibrant, decorative crosses. This one is by Colors of Praise, but I've seen a lot of floral ones. I think that Colors of Praise has done too for Easter time. And yeah, I don't think that a lot of needlepoint designers are designing like the actual crucifixion, which is probably good, but you could. Like, there's no rule saying that you can't. Um Probably the visual that you might want to see, or that a needlepoint designer could do, would be the empty tomb. Might be kind of a cool, interesting visualization for the Easter story. Um, so I like, while we're talking about religious symbols and needlepoint, like there are some things that like I feel like could be added, right? Like I would love to see some more religious representation in needlepoint, because right now we have a lot of Christian stuff and a lot of Judaica, which is wonderful, but I know that there are other religions in the world, and maybe one of the reasons, and I harp on this all the time, but maybe the reason that like more people aren't into needlepoint is because they don't feel welcome, and it's kind of like a chicken egg situation. Like, do we create the space and show people that they're safe and welcome by presenting and having different representations available to them, or how do we do that? But I think that there should be some more religious representation in needlepoint, because there's more than one way to um incorporate your needlework, incorporate your creativity, incorporate your art into your religious practice or your spiritual practice. um Even like just putting this together, I was thinking about like, oh, it would be so neat, like if you could stitch like a bookmark. That's that's specifically your bookmark for your religious text. Um, or different ornaments for different holidays, outside of just like your regular Christmas ornaments. I haven't seen a lot of the Chrismon ornaments done in needlepoint. I think they've been done in different contexts, but I think that would be a really interesting thing to do as well. Okay, so that's religious needlepoint, and then how it's used in the church and then in the home. Now, I'm gonna get more into like the spiritual needlepoint now. So this is like it doesn't necessarily have to fall under any one specific religion. It can be just like anybody's spiritual practice, spiritual connectedness, and how that may manifest through their stitching. We talked last week a lot about how needlepoint is really soothing to the nervous system. And so I think that it's a very good example of how needlepoint can be used as a meditation practice. Um, a lot of spiritual practices, like, meditation, yoga, like a lot of the Eastern philosophies will encourage people to like do mindfulness practices, breathing exercises. Um, the Buddhists have like the sand art that they do in order to get into a meditative state as well. Like there's a lot of different ways that like religions and established spiritual practices encourage the mindset being like one of the first steps towards towards practicing your spirituality. So needlepoint can get us into that mindfulness. I saw a really interesting like metaphor for this for the concept of like a prayer that you use with needlepoint, or with any type of stitching. And that is when the needle comes up, it connects with the spiritual realm up above, or like, in our minds, we may visualize the spiritual realm as being up above. So the needle comes up and then it comes back down and it connects the spiritual with you in that moment. And then it goes farther down. The needle goes farther down under the canvas, and then as it comes up, it brings the energy of the earth with it. So where you are in the middle, where your canvas is like the union between the spiritual and the physical plane, and it's the union of where you are between those realms. And I think that's a fascinating metaphor, probably a really good thought exercise if you are wanting to use needlepoint in your spiritual practice with intention. That may be a good way to think about, the combination, that the needle going towards the sky, entering the canvas, and then going back towards the earth, and then coming back to the canvas, combining those two things. So, in addition to the meditative aspects of needlepoint, I'm a huge fan of the idea of using your art and your stitches within your prayers or your requests to your divinity. So, for example, the Bless This Child canvas, again by Patricia Sohn. I really like her in this presentation for some reason. I really like her designs. The Bless This Child is a prayer. Um, it's a beautiful canvas. It's a gorgeous design, but while you're stitching it, you are asking for blessings for the child. Um, so you can use your stitching in those types of prayers, in those types of requests. Um, and and you can do that by like selecting projects that you remind you of your spiritual goals, or that otherwise facilitate a prayer for yourself or for a loved one. And I don't think that that the things that you choose, if you want to start incorporating needlepoint into your spiritual practice, like the things that you stitch, don't actually have to be like overly religious or anything like that. Like it can be a way to share your love with someone and also pray for blessings for them, or pray for protection for them, or otherwise just like weave yourself and your goodwill towards that person into a project. And I think a lot of people do that with, little gifts that they do for people. And I thought this was cute. My love language is needlepoint, because how often are we gifting our needlepoint? But then also with the belts, I think a belt is another really great way to stitch something for somebody with a lot of intention and with a lot of goodwill. And I think a lot of people may do this not even realizing that they're doing it, like especially when you're gifting a needlepoint canvas for somebody for a special occasion. Like if you're gifting a needlepoint canvas for a wedding or for graduation or for another like really important time in their lives, like you are wishing for the best for that person and you're stitching those wishes into your needlepoint as you're doing it. Um, and then gifting it to that person. I think that's really cool. Um, so again, here's some of my designs and how I think, you can incorporate your mindfulness and meditation or your prayers and requests types of things. Um, my create your own destiny canvas, I feel like that is a really strong reminder that like you have some free will in your life and you can exert that will in your life and create whatever you want. Um, make your life whatever you want it to be. The Green Man, maybe term like your love for nature or like how um you want like the world to be a better place. You want to see like a better combination of man and nature. And so that may be like the visual symbol that cues that up for you in your mind. The Anatomy series, I feel like, is a really good example of this in terms of stitching for prayers for health. Um, I've seen a lot of people or heard from a lot of people who will buy these when they're about to go through a healthcare procedure that has something to do with one of those organs. And it's just like, it's just a place to like put some of your energy and put some of your focus. But in addition to that, it is a place where you can put your prayers for that healing as well. And then I think another way and why I included the tarot card in this slide is that you can reinforce your goals and desires visually through symbols. Um, and stitching those symbols and being very intentional with the needlepoint that you are selecting that helps to reinforce kind of your goals and your desires and your dreams or even things that you want to embody in your life. Stitching like something that's archetypal and has that sort of a meaning kind of helps to tell your subconscious that that's really important and that it needs to pay attention because you're spending so much time with this project. So let me go through with you just a few additional techniques for how you could possibly incorporate some spirituality into your stitching. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is not the only way. These are just like a few ideas. Think of this as like a brainstorming session, not necessarily the be all end all. So, investigate the meanings and even if it's just like an internal investigation, like checking in with yourself and asking yourself how you feel about these things. But really look into the meanings of colors and symbols and using those colors and symbols to connect to your conscious mind with your subconscious. And so using those things to reinforce your goals. So for example, let's say um let's say that you're really worried about your finances and you really want to like get over whatever it is in your mind that's like causing that worry, whether it's like okay, I don't believe in myself enough to go after the promotion that I think I deserve, or if it's just a lot of fear and a lot of worry and feeling like okay, I'm afraid that I'm not going to have enough, like the opposite of abundance, the scarcity kind of mindset. So what you may want to do then is like put your faith into the divine creator that's looking after you and just saying to yourself and to your creator like okay, I know that I'm being taken care of. I know that I'm actually sitting in and living in abundance. How can you reinforce to yourself on a subconscious level that that's true when you're feeling like, okay, that's I feel like I'm in a scarcity mindset. What you may want to do is select projects and colors and ideas and stitching, etc., that makes you feel like you live in abundance and shows you like that wealth or that fertility. So the color that comes to mind for me then is green, right? And money is green, or the American money is green, but also like green is a really good color for fertile soil, fertile ground. It's the color of growth and abundance and richness, right? So you may want to be incorporating a lot more green into your projects, or selecting projects that help to reinforce that you are okay and that you're taken care of. Something that comes to mind for me is the Lyset or the Lady Derby like $100 money clip, um, as an example of that. And so then you can stitch your prayers and your intentions into that project for a specific purpose. Um, Yeah, okay. Another thing that you can do, besides like selecting your projects very carefully, selecting your colors very carefully, is when you're doing just a regular normal project, um, that may not have been selected for any specific spiritual goal, or say maybe it's a gift for someone, but it's like, very vague. Like there's nothing directly in the imagery that tells you or like connects on that level. You could hide a word or a symbol or something like in the background stitches of the project. So one thing that I have done is I've stitched a little like protection symbol in the background prior to stitching the background, just done a little symbol directly in the stitches, just in a tent stitch, and then filled in the background in basket weave around that. So like when it's all done and stitched, you can't tell that it's there, but you know it's there because you stitched it there, and it's kind of it's hiding there. So you could stitch a word for love, like love. You could stitch love. You could stitch a heart. You could stitch a cross. Anything that has significant meaning to you and that you know is there, you could hide in the stitching. Um, and I think that's really cool because like you stitch the symbol and it takes a long time to stitch the symbol. And then you have to stitch around the symbol. So you get more time with it to really reinforce to yourself this is what it is. The other thing that I want to encourage you guys to do when you are stitching, like with a spiritual focus, is to not worry so much about being perfect in terms of your techniques or skill, but just be creative, be open, like don't don't get too fixated on perfection. Just allow yourself to be free with your creativity and willing to try new things and have the intention of enjoyment or meditation or just like creative expression. I don't think that it benefits anybody to get too hung up on the perfect, especially when you're trying to do a creative project or a spiritual project or anything like that. So just be open, be okay. It's all good. All right. So I think that's it for my talk with you guys today. I'm going to turn off the presentation, and I might just open it up for questions and for discussion now. So let me see here. Where am I? All right. Any
Stephanie, I had a question about, I think you showed with was it the National Cathedral or something? I don't know. You showed like three shields.
Yeah.
Were those needle pointed?
Yeah.
Those were
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. 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 It's so amazing. The National Cathedral is so amazing, y'all. I'm gonna stop the recording now.